In this video, we will work an asset liability management problem. Essentially, we have two bonds to select from, a triple B bond and a high yield bond to support this annuity. Someone's going to buy annuity for $100,000. Here's all the information. The yields on the current bonds we have to select from, their capital charges, the crediting rate we want to pay, 3.5%, our expense load, the haircut on the higher risk bonds, 1.1% for triple B, 2% for the high yield, our ROE target, and our risk-based capital target, which means the 4% and the 20%, that's the minimum according to the regulators, but we'll multiply those by 1.25 in order to get our actual target amounts. So the first thing we need to do, step one, is just figure out the risk-based capital requirement. So we have a triple B bond and we have high yield. So we have C1 risk, C2 risk, C3 risk, and the total. So we'll just add it across. C1 risk, we have 4% for the triple B, 20% for the high yield, but we multiply those by 1.25% because that's their target risk-based capital. So when we do that, that makes this one 5% for the triple B, and it makes the high yield 25%. If we take 5% times $100,000, that gives us a capital charge for the triple B of $5,000. So again, that's the $100,000 annuity premium times the risk-based capital charge of 5%, and the 5% was this risk-based capital from the regulators times our target risk-based capital of 125% gives us 5%. And for the high yield, it's $25,000. The 25% times the $100,000. There is no C2 risk in that. In this case, the C2 risk, remember, relates to mortality risk, and this is an annuity which do not have a great deal of mortality risk. So we've got $5,000 and $25,000 for C1 risk, no C2 risk, and C3 risk is the same for both. The risk-based capital requirement is 1%, but again we multiply that by 1.25 because of our target risk-based capital, and so that gives us 1.25%. 1.25% times $100,000 means that our capital charge for both the triple B and the high yield is $1,250. We then add that across, and so our capital charge for triple B is $5,250, and for the high yield is $26,250. The next thing we do is we work out the income statement. So the income statement, you have your investment earnings, then you have your default haircut. That's the amount you're going to set aside in case one of these bonds goes bad. You're then going to pay the crediting rate to your customer, which is going to go into their investment with you as an annuity. You have expenses. That's going to give you a net income. And then we'll take that net income and divide it by our capital charge, and that will give us our return on equity. Our investment earnings, we're going to make 5.5% on the $100,000 for the triple B and 7.5% for the $100,000 for the high yield. So for triple B and high yield, triple B will be $5,500, 5.5% times 100,000, and the high yield will be $7,500. $5,500 for the high yield for the triple B, $7,500 for the high yield. The haircut for the triple B is 0.1%. 0.1% times $100,000 is $100. And for the high yield, our haircut is 2%, so that makes a haircut of $2,000. Our crediting rate, we want to credit 3.5%, so we want to pay our policyholders 3.5%. So that's the same whether it's the triple B bond or the high yield bond, $3,500. And then our expense load is 1.3%, so that also is the same. for both bonds. So what is our net income? Well, it's our income minus the haircut, minus the crediting rate, minus the expense. So our net income for the triple B is 600. Our net income for the high yield is 700. So we have more income from the high yield. However, the high yield has a lot more capital requirement. It's 26,250, whereas the triple B is 5250 total. So we take 600 for the triple B's net income divided by their capital charge, 5250, and that gives us an ROE of 9.6%. And for the high yield, we have $700 and we divide it by its capital charge, 26,250, and that gives us 2.67%. Our required return that we're targeting is 9%. So only the triple B has meets the 9% requirement. It's 9.6. So we could put 100% of our portfolio in triple B, and for life insurance companies, that's actually not that unusual. However, if only the high yield met the requirement, if these were switched in some way, then you would not be able to put the entire portfolio in high yield. That would be just too risky. Maybe you could put as much as 10% in high yield. And in that case, you would have to decide to either miss your target or to have some other approach to try to make up. So if you don't make it, in this case you do have enough. But the question asks, what do you do if you can't meet the ROE target? And those options come down to, you could take more investment risk. So the triple B bonds, we're just giving you a return of 5.5%. But you might be able to find some triple B bonds at a higher yield, maybe because they're actually more risky than the triple B rating reflects. So you can get a higher yield, but your capital charge wouldn't come up. That would be actually kidding yourself, because you're actually taking more risk. It's just that the risk-based capital doesn't recognize it. You could change the RBC target. Instead of trying for 125%, do less, but the risk of that is that you're downgraded, because the rating agencies will recognize that. A third thing you do is have a lower crediting rate. But if you do that, you're not as competitive. The next thing you do is you can cut your expenses, which insurance companies should be doing that all the time. Obviously that has implications for your service quality and other things, but if you can cut expenses, companies should cut expenses if they can. You could change the haircut, but again, the haircut is based on history. So if you cut the haircut, you're just fooling yourself, and you actually may need that additional amount. You could change your ROE target. Instead of asking for a 9% return, you could ask for a lower return, but that's going to upset your stockholders. It's going to cause your stock price to decline. So there are no really good answers other than cutting expenses, which companies should do all the time. But it's challenging. It's a very competitive field, and a lot of companies simply choose number 6, just don't meet their ROE target for a while and hope they can make it up later. But it's a challenging problem. Thanks.